Hello everybody and welcome to another figure review. Today may not be Figure Friday, but that doesn't mean we can't open and review this awesome figure either way. Today, of course, we are looking at the SH Monsterarts Godzilla 2019. This is the Godzilla from King of the Monsters, of which you may understand I recently saw. I did rather enjoy this movie, and I'm a huge Godzilla fan, so I want to get this figure open, so let's get this thing done. As we begin, we can see there's a windowed display here with Godzilla on the left, and an image of him to the right. Plenty of nice blue text on that dark black back with a bit of blue gradient coming in, some icons all over the place, the Monsterverse image, the legendary Pictures logo, Toho, and the 65-year Godzilla anniversary mention right there. This is, of course, a Bandai figure. And of course, it's by Tamashii Nations as well. A little bit of a hollow sticker right there to show you that this thing is authentic, and let's tilt it to the side. Some more logos for the Monsterverse, and of course the name of the figure and the line on the side. The other side, of course, has the iconic pose from the movie of him shooting up into the sky with his roar. And on the back, of course, we have some poses, the mention of the accessories, and a bunch of text that I am not going to take the time to translate. That's the bottom, and that is the top. Now, you'll typically see this figure listed for around $70. That was his original advertised price, but if you pre-ordered him from a site like AmiAmi or maybe even HobbyLink, you could have gotten him as low as a high $50, maybe very low $60 value. After the fact, it's kind of difficult to come by him without paying a little bit extra, and this one I actually found at a Barnes & Noble store, strangely enough, and he was only $70 there, so I think that's pretty fair, especially because I didn't pay any shipping, so that's what you're going to spend on a figure like this, anywhere between $60 and $70. The Monsterarts figures typically keep their value pretty well, and this one's very similar to the 2014 Godzilla because essentially it's the same monster, but this one of course has some accessory pieces. Now, the only difference would be the Spitfire edition of the 2014 Godzilla. That one is the same sculpt pretty much, but he has transparent blue spines, and he does come with an atomic breath accessory part. This one is pretty much the same sculpt as the other two, though he does not have the colored spines. He is a simple black-grayish color, though he does come with his atomic breath accessories. And with that, let's open this. And this is what we are greeted with in the packaging. Of course, he has his atomic breath part, which is really lovely detailed. It is a transparent blue with a silverish finish on the top to add some lighting effect, and it splashes out at the end, which is really nice. This is a super nice part. Also, you have the additional jaw, which acts as the hilt to what would hold his atomic breath. Some great detail on that. You can see his teeth. There's not too much gap, which is nice, so it won't look terrible once it's in. And there's even a little bit of fleshy sort of red tone right there to, I guess, simulate the inside of his mouth, which should be red, of course. And there's a tiny little ball joint right there where it connects to the face. It's a big boy. As many Godzilla fans may know, the legendary Pictures version of Godzilla is a chonky boy. We're talking hefty, we're talking thick, and damn does this boy look great out of the packaging. When you pick him up, he is super solid, which is a very nice addition to see, to have such a hefty figure in hand. I love heavy figures. They just seem like they're higher quality. There's more plastic there, of course, so you're getting more bang for your buck instead of some hollow piece of junk. That being said, let's take a look at this beast. From the bottom of his foot to the top of his tallest spine, he looks to be just about 6 inches, which I guess would make him 1/12 scale? I would love to know what this thing weighs because, man, he is a solid hunk of meat. He feels really solid in hand, not just heavy, but just good quality, and that's what I really appreciate about these figures. Nothing feels like it's about to break off, and I'm sure that I could play around with some of these joints and get him to separate, but that's not what we're here for. At first glance, this figure is wonderful, and it's a wonderful representation of the Godzilla from the movie. This looks perfect, just like him. And what I'm really digging is this face. Absolutely gorgeous. Look at that. There's so much character in that face. From the detail of the eyes, even with that tiny dot in the middle of the pupil, they just got the painting on this thing perfect. As well as the sculpting of the brow, the jaw, it all just looks great. And there may be a lot of seams in him, many areas where he disconnects and separates, but they don't look bad. For a figure, this is gorgeous, especially if you want it to be articulate. And from what I understand, this figure consists of many ball joints, meaning he has awesome poseability pretty much everywhere you look. Look at this. Look at that tongue. Now, don't get me wrong, he looks amazing, but I am noticing a little bit of issue with the paint on his teeth. Particularly right over here around his lip, you can sort of see there's a bit of a paint error right there. And I don't know if this is coming up on camera, but there's a weird shine that I keep seeing on his head. I'm not sure if there's like a bit of the silver paint that they used for his teeth, but it looks as if there's some on his nose at certain angles, and on the top of his head, there's just a slight shine. It's kind of strange, but it won't take away from this for me. I still love the way he looks. But seriously though, focusing on the body, look at the detail and how scaly and rough he looks. This is a character that has been through some stuff. This is a big old boy who has fought and conquered other monsters. So honestly, I'm really not too mad at anything. Everything is looking wonderful so far. The body is well constructed. The joints seem to be decently responsive, but tight enough so that they won't be problematic. There's a little bit of rub because of this part here where his leg is, so just be careful if you are going to pose him. I could see that potentially wearing down over time, and there's really no way to avoid it. It's just going to happen, so that's a bit of a design oversight, though you really can't expect much. If you don't want to have gaps, then you're going to have to sacrifice something, and that may be it. But I don't think you're going to be making him karate kick like the Showa Godzilla, so calm down. Not sure if you can see it, but right there you can see where the tail connects is a ball joint on a nice long peg, and from what I understand, every segment of this tail is also ball joints. Now, the tail has decent articulation. You can't expect too much out of this thicker rooted part of it, but it can move a bit if you loosen it up some. The most of the articulation is going to be towards the edge of the tail where it thins out. And of course, right here in particular is where a very loose joint is. And I don't know why it's quite so articulate there, but I mean, that's fine. But that tail is awesome. And when we measure him from head to tail, you're looking at about 13 inches long, which is pretty impressive. That's over a foot long. The tail, of course, is a majority of that length, coming in around 8 inches long. Now let's take a look at his articulation. Of course, he has the shoulder articulation, which is very, very tight. You can get a gentle swivel, but it doesn't go far thanks to the seam being so snug so that there's minimal gaps. The head has a decent roundabout. You can make him kind of roll his head, which also shows us his waist is decently posable. You can get it to rotate and move a bit, but of course, Godzilla doesn't need to be going in a 90-degree angle. Not sure if you can tell, but right here on my stand, there's actually a bit of black plastic, which is from, I think, shavings from the way that his body sort of grinds against itself. His elbows are decent. You have a double joint there where the actual meat of his elbow is pretty stiff, but then where it connects to his forearm, you get a little bit more love. Of course, you can get a slight swivel out of them. It's not too bad. The hand is fine. It goes in a full swivel, and you can get a little bit up and down and roll it around a bit. Beyond that, of course, we already talked about his legs having minimal ability to move thanks to the seam, but you can get them pretty good. His thighs are so hefty that when you try to spread it out, it's pretty limited, but it does let you do what you need to do. As you can see with the leg, there's a joint at the bottom and the top above the knee and below the knee, so the actual knee itself doesn't move much, but you can get his leg to move just a gentle bit. You can actually split it pretty easily this way. I actually popped off his other knee in the process of trying to pose it. You can see but you know, you get your minimal movement there. And of course the ankle is on a ball joint, so you have a decent amount of movement there, but you only need to angle it so that he can stand properly. One thing I noticed while I was posing him is that the area where his spines begin at the root of his tail, this area is very, very loose. Now, I think that's just so that you can move the tail around, and of course, the more that you move it and pose it, the less it becomes a problem, but just know that that is very loose there, and I'm assuming it's only so that you can actually pose the tail, but it's just a little too much for my liking. When you really get in there and check it out, the spines look amazing. There's so much texture on this figure that he's almost uncomfortable to hold due to how much you can feel when he's in your hand. But that's great. We have plenty of spines here going up and down his back, and they all look great. No loss of paint or anything like that. It looks fine through and through. There's really no details, but the shading, I will say, is pretty good. You have this lighter stuff out here, but inside the innards of his neck and on the inside of his body, you can see a little bit more darker application there, which looks fine. He actually has somewhat of like a military green, very desaturated, grayish green look to him, which it makes the figure look very weathered and textured, which is what Godzilla, of course, is. The toes, while in need of a decent pedicure, look awesome. Some light brushing effects gives an awesome shine to each nail, making each one look textured and weathered. Similarly, his hands are very gently painted as well. The nails have just the slightest amount of gray in there, which allows you to see that, yeah, you know what, he has done some damage with those hands, and I like it. It looks fine. Really though, this face is where it's at. I love the face probably the most of all. It looks so expressive, sort of like the way he was in the movie. They were great about giving Godzilla so much character in his facial animations, and this is brought forward well in this figure. For as limited as his poseability is, the bigger problem comes in with his weight. With as much as I love the weight of the figure, it does create more problems than it does eliminate them. Because he's so heavy, and with his limited poseability, that creates an even bigger problem of him not really being able to hold the poses you can get him into. I struggled getting him to lean over sort of in the way that he is right now, and it's really not even that big of a pose. It's not very iconic, nor is it something that I think I would leave him in, but just trying to get him in a variety of poses is going to prove more difficult when you actually try to sit him down. His tail acts more of a ballast, and it is needed in a lot of poses, but sometimes you can't use that counterweight to do anything with, so that's one problem I see with the figure. Some people are more into statue-type figures that don't pose. I myself am more into articulate figures that I can do stuff with. Of course, this Godzilla kind of falls somewhere in the middle. He has all the joints and ability to be posed as a regular figure would, but he acts more like a statue when you try to use him. For me, this isn't too big of a problem because I primarily just wanted a Godzilla figure from the new movie. But for some, it may be more of an issue. You can't do as much with him as you could with maybe the NECA figures. Now, the NECA figures cost a fraction of what a Monsterarts figures will cost, and of course their details are not as high, but they are more durable, they're a more lighter plastic, more of a rubbery sort of feel, and you don't have to worry as much about damaging them because they don't cost $60, $70. For me though, even if he is limited in his articulation, I still like what he can do. The details are perfect. This looks like a representation of Godzilla from the movie. Now, this may be due to there being some sort of claim of them using the actual CG models to create these figures. I've read that one or two places when I was looking at the listings for these figures, and I'm not so sure how true it is, but if so, then yeah, it worked. But let's talk about that atomic breath, because everybody wants that. You can't just stick the thing into his mouth like that. Gobble, gobble, gobble. No, you of course have to swap out that jaw, which seems to be simple enough. It's on a ball joint, so it pops right out. That's what Godzilla would look like if he lost his bottom jaw. That's terrifying. But of course, if you want to use the atomic breath, you take the additional piece and you pop that in. Now, I'll teach you one thing, if anything, with this video. You have to sort of squeeze this plastic because it's a little bit harder, whereas his face has that thin plastic, which you need to kind of squeeze that into, and then plug the joint. With a little bit of finessing, he'll start to look like this. But that alone looks silly. It just looks like he's barfing up some cotton candy. That is, of course, until we plug this into this. And I will say that was surprisingly easy. It just sort of plugs in and you can pull it right back out. There's no additional peg or anything like that. It just fits in there. And that's probably about as good as I can get the call to arms scene from the King of the Monsters movie to look. You sort of have to work with the bend that's in the atomic breath piece. It sort of curves just a tiny bit to one direction. And of course, if you can get him to look fully upright, then you can recreate the scene. It looks a bit better from the side, but it's hard to get into frame. Still, I appreciate the piece and the ability to do this. This was an iconic scene. So at the end of the day, what are we left with? We're left with an amazing figure. The big faults that I can find is there being a little bit too much tightness in him to eliminate gaps. That tightness is going to cause rub, which is going to cause some damage in the painting. There was a little bit of paint application error in this, which I do expect more from a $60, $70 figure, though it's not too severe. The overall sculpting and painting looks so good. It looks perfect compared to the movie. The additional effects parts are wonderful, but the big problem I see with them is that the weight is completely leaning on his actual jaw. Over time, that is going to put way too much stress on that ball joint, and therefore it is going to cause that jaw to loosen up. So if you do have an additional stand that you want to put under the atomic breath, that will help to alleviate the problem. And look, for whatever this figure does wrong, it does a heck of a lot more right. I'm just happy to get solid, good Godzilla figures coming out. I really appreciate what Bandai does with the Monsterarts figures, and I only hope for it to continue and ramp up and get even better. I would have liked an additional pair of hands, but when you compare it to any other Monsterarts release, this thing is fine. The atomic breath was a nice addition, and everything's done pretty well, so I can't be too mad. So with that said, I'm going to give this figure a 7 out of 10. When you compare the price point to what you get, it's pretty decent, but they could always give you a little bit more. I think that the painting, the sculpting, everything else was pretty great, but there could be just a tiny bit more to push this up by a point or two. Thank you guys so much again for watching. If you did like this video, please leave it a like. Do you enjoy Godzilla? Who's your favorite monster? Go ahead and comment below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and take a look at this playlist if you want to see any of my other figure reviews. You guys know I upload 3 times a week at minimum, so stay tuned for more, and hail to the king, baby.